Some stories don't feel like fiction. They feel remembered. This is one of them.
I should probably start by saying that I've never been someone who scares easily. I don't mean that in a tough guy way. I just grew up in a quiet place, learned early how to be alone, and never really felt uncomfortable with silence. If anything, I preferred it. That's part of why I moved where I did in the first place. This happened 3 years ago on New Year's Eve. I was 31 at the time, recently divorced, and living alone in a small house at the edge of a rural development in northern Pennsylvania. Technically, it was considered a neighborhood, but that word always felt misleading. There were maybe a dozen houses total, spread far enough apart that you couldn't see into anyone else's windows. Past the last row of homes, the land dropped off into dense woods that stretched for miles. I rented the place because it was cheap, quiet, and far away from everything I wanted to forget. New Year's Eve wasn't supposed to be anything special. I'd turned down invitations from coworkers, ignored texts from friends back in the city, and told my family I was keeping it low-key this year. That part wasn't even a lie. I genuinely wanted to be alone. It had snowed lightly that morning, just enough to coat the ground and soften the edges of everything. By dusk, the neighborhood looked frozen in place. No tire tracks, no footprints, just smooth, untouched white stretching from driveway to driveway. I remember noticing that because it made the house feel sealed off from the world. Inside, everything was normal, too normal. I spent the evening doing nothing memorable, made dinner, watched a movie I don't remember, had a local news channel playing quietly in the background just so the house wouldn't feel completely dead. Every once in a while, they'd cut to shots of Times Square preparations, bright lights and crowds that felt impossibly far away. Around 10:30, I poured myself a drink and turned the volume down even lower. That's when I noticed the first thing that didn't quite sit right. The back door was unlocked. I know for a fact I locked it earlier that evening. I have this habit of checking all the doors once it gets dark, even though nothing had ever happened out there. I chalked it up to muscle memory failing me and locked it again without thinking too much about it. That was my first mistake. By 11, the neighborhood was completely silent. No distant fireworks, no music drifting from nearby houses, not even a car passing on the road. It felt less like a celebration night and more like everyone had collectively decided to disappear. I remember smiling at that, thinking it was fitting. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from one of my neighbors. His name was Mark. I didn't know him well. We'd exchanged maybe a dozen words in the year I'd lived there, but he was friendly enough. The message said, "Hey, random question. Are you having people over tonight?" I stared at it for a moment, confused. I replied, "No, just me." A few seconds passed before he responded. "Okay, probably nothing. Happy New Year." That should have been the moment I paid attention. Instead, I put my phone down and turned the volume up slightly on the TV. The countdown in New York was starting soon. I remember feeling oddly detached from it, like I was watching footage from a different planet. That's when I heard the sound upstairs. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a single dull thump like something heavy settling into place. I froze, listening. Still, I stood up and listened for a full 30 seconds. Nothing else. I told myself it was nothing and sat back down. At 11:56, my phone buzzed again. Same neighbor. "Sorry to bother you again," Mark wrote. "Did you hear anything just now?" That's when the unease finally set in. I typed back, "What kind of anything?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, I heard it again. This time unmistakable. Footsteps. Still, I grabbed my phone and typed, "I think it's just the house settling." Mark's reply came instantly. "Okay, just checking. Happy New Year." The countdown on TV reached 10. I stood in the middle of my living room, phone in one hand, staring at the dark hallway that led upstairs. 10, 9, the footsteps stopped. 8, 7, the house felt too quiet. 6, 5. I noticed then that the air felt different, not colder, just stale, like a room that hadn't been opened in a long time. 4, 3, something creaked upstairs, directly above me. 2, 1, the crowd on TV erupted. Fireworks exploded across the screen and cheers filled the room, completely out of sync with the silence pressing in around me. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even look at the screen. I was staring at the staircase, waiting for something I didn't have a name for. The first minute of the new year passed in total silence. Then I heard a door open. Slowly. From upstairs. The sound of the door opening upstairs wasn't sharp or sudden. It was careful. Slow, like whoever was touching it didn't want it to make noise, but also didn't care if it did. That's what made it worse. The sound wasn't accidental. It wasn't the house settling or old hinges reacting to the cold. It was intentional. I stood there in the living room, barely breathing, trying to convince myself that there was another explanation. That maybe I'd left a door cracked upstairs earlier. That warm air had shifted something. That my brain was filling in gaps because of the silence. But then I heard it again, a second door, opening, this one closer to the staircase. I finally moved, backing slowly toward the kitchen without taking my eyes off the hallway. My phone was still in my hand, screen lit, Mark's last message glowing faintly in the dark. I thought about calling 911, but the idea felt ridiculous. What would I even say? Someone might be in my house? I told myself I needed proof first. That thought still embarrasses me. The kitchen window looked out toward the side of the house and the narrow stretch of yard that separated my place from the woods. Moonlight reflected off the snow, bright enough that I could see clear outlines of trees and fence posts. And footprints. They stood out immediately. A line of deep boot prints ran from the tree line straight toward my house. They stopped near the back door. They didn't continue past it. They didn't turn away. They simply ended there, as if whoever made them had stepped inside. I felt cold all over, not just physically. My brain raced, trying to catch up to what my eyes were telling me. Those footprints hadn't been there earlier. I would have noticed them. I'd looked out that window more than once that evening. My phone buzzed again. Mark. Hey, I don't want to freak you out, but I see someone moving upstairs in your house. My stomach dropped. I typed back with shaking hands. I'm downstairs alone. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then, I know, that's why I'm texting. That's when something moved at the top of the stairs, not fast, not slow. Just enough for me to see a shapeshift against the darkness. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stood there frozen, staring at the place where the hallway met the stairwell, waiting for whatever it was to fully reveal itself. It didn't. Instead, something else happened. A floorboard creaked directly above the living room. Then another. Then another. Whatever was in my house wasn't coming downstairs. It was pacing. I backed into the kitchen until my shoulder hit the counter. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears, and I was suddenly aware of how exposed I was, standing in the open like that. I kept my voice low, whispering as I explained that someone was inside my house, that I was alone, that I could hear them upstairs. The dispatcher asked for my address, asked if I could safely exit the house. I told her no. That's when the footsteps stopped. Complete silence filled the house again, so sudden it felt artificial. The dispatcher stayed on the line, her voice calm and steady, telling me officers were on the way. She asked me to move somewhere safe, somewhere I could lock myself in. I glanced at the pantry door. It felt ridiculous, but it was the only place nearby that had a solid door and no windows. I slipped inside and closed it quietly behind me. From inside the pantry, everything sounded distorted. My own breathing felt too loud, and every small noise echoed strangely. I pressed my back against the wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor, knees pulled tight to my chest. That's when I heard the stairs. Someone was coming down. One step at a time. Slow, unhurried. The sound stopped at the bottom of the staircase. I held my breath. A moment passed. Then another. Then I heard the kitchen floor creak. Closer now. The dispatcher asked if I could hear them. I couldn't bring myself to answer. The pantry door handle shifted. Just slightly. Not turning. Testing. I bit down on my lip hard enough to taste blood, clamping a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. The handle moved again, then stopped. Footsteps moved away from the pantry, slow and deliberate, crossing the kitchen and heading back toward the hallway. I stayed there for what felt like hours, barely breathing, listening as the sounds moved around the first floor. Cabinets opened. Something metal clinked softly. A chair scraped against the floor. At one point, I heard the back door open. Cold air rushed through the house, carrying the sharp, clean smell of snow. Then it closed again. The police arrived less than 10 minutes later, though it felt much longer. I didn't come out of the pantry until I heard them calling my name. They searched the house thoroughly. Every room, every closet, the attic, the basement. Nothing. No one was there. The back door was unlocked. The officers asked if I was sure I'd locked it earlier. They checked the snow outside and found the footprints I'd seen from the kitchen window. Boot prints leading from the woods straight to my back door. But there were no prints leaving. No disturbance in the snow at all beyond that point. One of the officers suggested maybe someone had walked backward in their own prints. Another suggested the wind could have filled them in. Neither explanation felt right. Before they left, one officer pulled me aside and told me my neighbor Mark had called them as well. Mark had seen someone standing in my upstairs window just after midnight. He'd assumed it was me at first, until he saw the figure move away from the glass without turning on a light. I didn't sleep in the house that night. Or the next. I stayed with a friend in town until I could bring myself to go back. When I finally did, everything looked normal. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But some things weren't where I'd left them. A chair in the living room had been moved closer to the staircase. A kitchen drawer I never used was left slightly open. And upstairs in the spare bedroom I hadn't been in for months, the window was unlocked. Pressed into the thin layer of frost on the glass were fingerprints. From the inside. I moved out before the end of January. I still drive past the neighborhood sometimes, especially around New Year's. It always looks quiet, peaceful, the kind of place where nothing ever happens. But I know better now. Because whatever came out of the woods that night didn't break in. It walked in. And if I hadn't stayed home alone that New Year's Eve, I don't think anyone would have noticed it at all. I want to start this by saying that I'm not someone who scares easily. I drive a lot, long distances, late hours, empty highways. It's something I've done for most of my adult life. I actually prefer driving at night. There's less traffic, fewer distractions, and everything feels quieter, more controlled. This happened on New Year's Eve. I was driving alone, heading north to spend the night at my brother's place. He lives in a small town about 3 hours away from where I live. I left later than I planned, mostly because I didn't feel like being surrounded by people counting down to midnight. I just wanted a quiet drive, some music, and a warm place to crash. By the time I got on the highway, it was already dark. Snow had started falling earlier that evening. Not a blizzard, just enough to coat the road in that thin, reflective layer that makes everything feel a little slick, a little unpredictable. The plows had already been through, but you could still feel the tires slipping slightly if you braked too hard. The highway was almost completely empty. That wasn't unusual. This stretch of road cuts through long sections of forest and farmland. No gas stations for miles, no houses close enough to see lights, just trees, snowbanks, and the occasional reflective sign reminding you that you're still on a marked route. I had the radio on low, mostly static mixed with distant stations. Every now and then I'd catch snippets of people celebrating, countdowns from cities far away, muffled cheering. It felt strange hearing that kind of energy while driving through total isolation. I remember checking the time. 11:41 p.m. I still had about an hour left to go. That's when I noticed the headlights behind me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Cars come and go. Someone probably driving faster passing through. But after a few minutes, I realized something felt off. The headlights weren't getting closer. They weren't falling back either. They were just there. Far enough away that I couldn't make out the car itself. Close enough that the lights stayed perfectly centered in my rearview mirror. White, steady, unmoving. I sped up slightly. So did they. I slowed down just a bit to test it. They matched my speed again. That's when I felt the first flicker of unease. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. It was late. I was tired. The snow, the darkness. It messes with your perception. Still, I changed lanes, moving into the slow lane. They followed. I moved back. They moved back too. At that point, I reached up and adjusted my rearview mirror, angling it slightly downward so the headlights weren't blasting straight into my eyes. The second I did that, my stomach dropped. Because for just a moment, less than a second, the angle changed enough that I could see the shape of the vehicle. It wasn't a truck. It wasn't an SUV. It looked older, boxy, dark. And there was something mounted on the front. At first, I thought it was just snow buildup. But the more I stared, the more it looked intentional. Something rigid, symmetrical, like a frame or a bar bolted across the grille. I told myself I was imagining it. I focused back on the road. The snow started coming down a little heavier. The lines on the highway blurred, reflecting my headlights back at me. The forest on either side pressed in closer, darker, thicker. Another glance at the clock. 11:52 p.m. I still hadn't seen another car in either direction. That's when the headlights behind me turned off. Not dimmed. Not flickered. Off. My first thought was relief. Maybe they took an exit. Maybe I was overthinking everything. But then I realized something much worse. I could still see them. Not the lights. The car. A dark shape moving through the snow, barely visible, keeping pace with me even without headlights. I could only see it because of the way my own brake lights reflected faintly off its surface. I slowed down. The shape slowed down too. My heart started beating harder. Not panic yet, just that sharp awareness that tells you something isn't right. I reached for my phone, thinking about calling my brother just to have someone on the line. That's when the headlights turned back on. But this time they were closer. Much closer. The car surged forward, closing the gap between us in seconds. I could see the grille clearly now. That metal frame on the front wasn't random. It looked reinforced. Like it was built to hit something. I felt my hands tighten around the steering wheel. The road ahead curved gently to the right, disappearing into trees. There were no exits marked for several miles. No shoulder wide enough to pull onto safely with the snow piled high. I pressed the gas. The engine protested, tires slipping slightly, then catching. My speed climbed. The speedometer ticked past numbers I normally wouldn't touch in those conditions. The car behind me didn't struggle at all. It stayed right there. Closer now, so close that the headlights flooded my entire car, casting my shadow across the dashboard. I could see my own breath fogging the windshield. And then, without warning, the headlights flashed. Once. Twice. Not high beams. A deliberate signal. That's when I knew this wasn't someone impatient or lost. They were trying to communicate. And whatever they wanted, it wasn't help. I didn't know what they expected me to do. Pull over? Slow down? Stop? There was nowhere safe to go. Snowbanks lined both sides of the road, piled high from the plows. The forest pressed in so close it felt like the highway had been carved straight through it as an afterthought. I ignored the flashing lights and kept driving. Another flash. This time longer. Then the car behind me drifted slightly to the left, just enough that I could see its front end more clearly in my mirror. That reinforced frame wasn't decorative. It was thick, industrial-looking, welded, scratched, like it had been used before. My mouth went dry. I thought about calling 911, but my signal indicator on the dashboard showed only one weak bar. I didn't trust it. I didn't want to waste time fumbling with my phone while driving on ice at high speed. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I slowed down. Just a little. The car behind me slowed too, but not immediately. For half a second, it felt like it hesitated, like whoever was driving hadn't expected that. The distance between us shrank fast before stabilizing again. That confirmed it. They weren't just following the road. They were reacting to me. I took a deep breath and tried to think logically. If I could just make it to a more populated area, a gas station, a rest stop, anything with lights and cameras, this would stop. People like this don't want witnesses. I scanned the road ahead for signs. Nothing. The snow muffled everything. Even the sound of my own tires felt distant, like I was driving through a tunnel made of cotton. The radio crackled uselessly, cycling through static and fragments of countdowns. 10, 9, 8. I shut it off. The silence made everything worse. I checked the time again. 11:57 p.m. 3 minutes until midnight. That's when the car behind me did something I wasn't prepared for. It swerved. Not aggressively, not toward me. Just a sudden sharp movement to the right, then back into place, like a test, like someone flexing control. My pulse spiked. I gripped the wheel harder, knuckles starting to ache. I could feel sweat forming under my jacket despite the cold. My breath came faster, shallow. I told myself not to panic. Panic makes mistakes. The road straightened out briefly, opening into a long, flat stretch. Visibility improved just enough that I could see farther ahead than before. And that's when I noticed something else that made my stomach sink. There were tire tracks in the snow ahead of me. Fresh ones. But only one set. Mine. No oncoming traffic, no cars ahead, no brake lights in the distance, just my tracks cutting through untouched snow. Which meant no one else had been on this road recently. Except the car behind me. I checked the rearview mirror again. The headlights dipped suddenly, then surged forward. They were accelerating. I had just enough time to realize what was happening before I felt it. The impact wasn't a crash, not fully. It was a hard shove, a deliberate nudge from behind, strong enough to jolt my car forward and send it swaying slightly side to side. They hit me. Not enough to spin me out. Enough to let me know they could. My heart slammed against my ribs. I shouted something, I don't even remember what, and instinctively corrected the wheel, fighting to keep control. The tires slipped, caught, slipped again. Behind me, the car pulled back. Just enough. Like they were waiting to see how I'd react. I didn't look back again. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, searching desperately for anything. A sign, a turnoff, a clearing. My thoughts raced, jumping between options, most of them terrible. I thought about stopping in the middle of the road. Bad idea. I thought about swerving into the forest. Worse idea. Then finally I saw it. A sign, half buried in snow on the right side of the road. Rest area, 2 kilometers. I felt a surge of hope so strong it almost made me dizzy. 2 kilometers wasn't far. I could make that. If the rest area was open, if there were lights, maybe a bathroom building, maybe even another car, I wouldn't be alone anymore. I pressed the gas again. The car behind me didn't wait this time. It surged forward aggressively, closing the gap until I could no longer see its headlights in my mirror, only the glare flooding my car. I felt another impact stronger than the first. My seatbelt dug into my chest as my car lurched. They weren't playing anymore. I fought the wheel, barely keeping the car straight as the rest area sign disappeared behind me. Snow sprayed up from the tires. My vision tunneled, narrowed to the thin strip of road ahead. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the pressure stopped. No more impact. No more flashing. I risked a glance in the mirror. The car behind me was slowing down, drifting back. Its headlights dimmed slightly as the distance grew. I didn't slow down, I didn't relax. I kept driving, eyes glued to the road, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The rest area entrance came up fast. I took it without signaling, turning sharply off the highway and into the snow-covered lot. The moment I crossed the threshold, the car behind me did something I'll never forget. It stopped. Right at the edge of the highway. Didn't follow me in. Didn't honk. Didn't flash its lights. It just sat there, engine idling, headlights pointed straight ahead. Not at me, but at the road. Like it had reached its limit. Like it couldn't go any farther. I pulled into the lot and slammed the car into park, chest heaving. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip my phone. I looked back one last time. The car was gone. The highway was empty again. Just like before. I sat there for a long time. The engine was still running, my headlights cutting weak yellow paths across the snow-covered rest area. The place looked abandoned. No other cars, no movement, no lights coming from the bathroom building. Just a single flickering lamp post near the entrance and the dark outline of trees surrounding everything. I checked the time. 11:59 p.m. 1 minute to midnight. My hands were still shaking, so I turned the car off and forced myself to breathe. In through my nose, out through my mouth. Slow, deliberate. I didn't trust my legs enough to get out of the car yet. I stared at the highway entrance, half expecting those headlights to reappear. They didn't. Midnight came and went in complete silence. No fireworks, no cheers, no distant explosions echoing through the woods. Just the wind pushing loose snow across the asphalt in thin, whispering lines. Eventually, I convinced myself it was over. Maybe it had been road rage. Maybe a drunk driver. Maybe someone messing around because it was New Year's Eve. None of those explanations felt right, but they were better than the alternatives. After another few minutes, I grabbed my phone and finally tried calling 911. The call didn't go through. Still no signal. I decided to get out of the car. The cold hit me immediately, sharp and biting. My boots crunched loudly against the snow, the sound echoing unnaturally in the empty lot. I walked toward the bathroom building, my phone flashlight scanning the ground in front of me. That's when I noticed the tire tracks. There were only 2 sets in the lot. Mine. And one other. They led from the highway entrance just a few feet into the rest area, then stopped. No turn, no curve, no exit back onto the road. Just stopped. Like the car had rolled in, paused, and vanished. My stomach tightened. I followed the tracks slowly, my breath fogging in front of my face. The snow around them was undisturbed, no footprints, no signs of anyone getting out of the vehicle. I reached the end of the tracks and stood there staring at nothing. That's when I heard it. A sound from behind the bathroom building. Metal scraping softly against metal. I froze. The sound came again, deliberate this time, slow, like something being dragged. I didn't call out. I didn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to get back to the car, but my body refused to cooperate. Then the sound stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Nothing. I took one step back. Then another. That's when I saw the reflection. Not headlights, something lower. A dull glow bouncing off the snow, moving slightly like it was being blocked and unblocked. I turned my flashlight toward it. Nothing. But the glow was still there, faint and wrong, shifting behind the building. I didn't stay to investigate. I ran. I bolted back to my car, nearly slipping on the ice as I yanked the door open and slammed it shut behind me. I locked the doors, started the engine, and threw it into drive without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the next town. Lights, houses, a gas station still open despite the hour. I pulled in and sat there shaking, watching other people come and go like it was any normal night. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I just waited until my heart slowed down enough for me to drive again. The next morning, I checked the local news. No accidents. No police reports. No mentions of road incidents on that highway. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I went back. Daytime made the road look harmless, ordinary. The rest area was open, plowed, busy enough with travelers stretching their legs and using the bathrooms. I walked around the same spot where I'd seen the tracks. There was nothing unusual. Except one thing. Near the edge of the lot, partially hidden by snow piled from plowing, I noticed deep gouge marks in the asphalt. Parallel lines, too evenly spaced to be tire chains, too deep to be accidental. They led from the entrance. Out of nowhere. I asked an employee inside if the rest area had security cameras. She told me they did, but they'd been offline that night due to weather-related power issues. Of course they were. I still drive that highway sometimes, but never on New Year's Eve. And never at night if I can help it. Because every time I pass that rest area, I swear I feel it. That same pressure in my chest, that same sense of being watched. And sometimes, just for a second, I catch myself checking the mirror, expecting to see headlights that aren't there. I've gone camping my entire life. That's not an exaggeration or a way to make this story sound more credible. It's just a fact. My parents took me camping when I was a kid, long before I had any real say in it, and I kept doing it into adulthood because I genuinely enjoyed it. I know the routines, I know the sounds, I know what belongs in the woods and what doesn't. I know the difference between an animal moving nearby and a person trying to stay quiet. That's why this still bothers me. This happened a few years ago over New Year's weekend. I had taken time off work and wanted to be alone. Not in a dramatic, self-reflective way. I just needed quiet. No crowds, no noise, no obligations. Winter camping always appealed to me because it naturally filters people out. Most people don't want to deal with snow, cold, or isolation when they can be warm somewhere else. I chose a small, state-managed campground near a forest reserve. It wasn't advertised as remote, but in winter it might as well have been. 6 campsites total. 1 narrow access road. No ranger station nearby. Cell service was spotty at best, and I knew that going in. When I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun was already low in the sky. Everything was covered in a thin, even layer of snow. It looked untouched, almost artificial, like a postcard that hadn't been handled yet. Only one other car was parked near the far end of the campground. No movement, no smoke rising from a fire, no sound at all. I sat in my car for a moment, engines still running, just listening. Nothing. I assumed whoever the car belonged to was already set up or maybe out hiking deeper in the woods. It didn't seem strange at the time. People camp for different reasons. My site was close to the tree line, but still visible from the road. I liked having an escape route, even if it was mostly psychological. I unpacked slowly, taking my time, double-checking my gear more than usual. The air was cold, but calm. No wind, no snowfall, just that heavy winter silence that makes everything feel closer than it is. I set up my tent, started a small fire, and cooked dinner as dusk settled in. The woods felt unnaturally still, the way they do when snow absorbs sound. Every movement I made felt louder than it should have. boots crunching on packed snow, fabric shifting, the crackle of firewood snapping and popping in the pit. By around 10:30 p.m., I had a small radio playing quietly. Not music, just a local station doing a New Year's broadcast. They were talking about the countdown, playing old recordings from previous years. The signal faded in and out, which made the voices sound distant and warped, like they were coming from somewhere underground or far away in the trees. That's when I noticed something strange. My fire wasn't changing. I'd built enough of a fire to last maybe an hour, tops. But the flame stayed exactly the same, steady, low, consistent, not dying, not flaring, just suspended, as if time around it had slowed down. I remember adding a log to test it. The fire accepted it, burned it down slowly, and then returned to the same size it had been before. No bigger, no smaller. It felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I told myself it was the cold air, or the type of wood. Fires behave differently in winter, especially when there's no wind. Around 11:15 p.m., I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was snow shifting or a branch falling under its own weight. But then it happened again. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Someone walking slowly. Not heavy, not rushed, deliberate, like they were choosing where to place each step. I stood up and listened. The sound stopped immediately. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight, moving it slowly from left to right. Nothing reflected back. No eyes, no movement, just trees and darkness pressing in from beyond the firelight. I told myself it was the other camper. Maybe they were heading to the bathroom or checking something at their site. Still, something about the silence afterward made my skin crawl. By midnight, the radio was almost entirely static, but I could still hear faint cheering mixed in, voices celebrating somewhere far away. I raised a mug of coffee toward the fire and quietly said, "Happy New Year," to no one in particular. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. They started just beyond the edge of the firelight, near the tree line, and stopped abruptly. No prints leading away, just ending, as if someone had stepped into the light and then disappeared. I stared at them for a long time before moving. My heart was beating harder than it should have been. I followed the prints backward with my flashlight, step by careful step. They didn't go far. They simply vanished into untouched snow. No drag marks, no scuffing, just clean, smooth ground like no one had ever been there at all. I went back to my chair, but I didn't sit down. I kept standing, slowly turning, scanning the darkness beyond the fire. I felt watched. Not hunted, not threatened. Observed. Around 12:40 a.m., I heard breathing. It was faint and uneven, like someone trying very hard not to be heard. It stopped when I froze. I didn't call out. I didn't move. I didn't even reach for my flashlight. The breathing resumed when I shifted my weight slightly. That was enough. I went into my tent, zipped it up completely, and turned off my lantern. I lay there fully clothed, boots still on, listening to every sound my body made as if it might give me away. Footsteps circled my tent. Slow, even controlled. They stopped near my head. A shadow appeared through the thin fabric, barely darker than the surrounding night. It didn't move. It didn't shift. I held my breath until my chest burned and my head started to feel light. Eventually, the shadow faded. I don't know how long I lay there before exhaustion finally pulled me under. At dawn, I woke to complete silence. I stepped outside and felt my stomach drop. The fire pit was still warm, not burning. Warm. Fresh footprints circled my tent completely. They stopped at the entrance. Facing inward. I packed up immediately and left without eating, without thinking, without looking back. I never returned. And I still don't know why that fire never went out. I've never liked New Year's Eve. Not because of the noise or the crowds, but because there's something unsettling about everyone focusing on the same moment at the same time. The countdown, the pause, that shared breath right before the year changes. It always felt exposed, like the entire world was briefly standing still, and anyone paying attention could slip into that silence unnoticed. This happened a few years ago when I was living alone in a small apartment complex just outside the city. It wasn't a bad place. An older building, 4 floors, thin walls, outdated carpet in the hallways, but generally quiet. Mostly couples, retirees, and a few people like me who kept to themselves. The kind of building where you recognized faces but rarely exchanged more than a nod. I lived on the 3rd floor, at the very end of the hallway. Only one neighbor directly across from me, an older man I barely interacted with. We nodded at each other sometimes when our schedules overlapped. That was it. I never even knew his name. New Year's Eve that year was unusually cold. Snow had been falling on and off all day, light but persistent, and by evening the streets were almost empty. The city felt muted. I had turned down invitations from friends and decided to stay in. Ordered takeout, poured myself a drink, and planned to be in bed not long after midnight. Around 9 p.m., I noticed the hallway was quieter than usual. No footsteps, no doors opening or closing. Normally, even on a calm night, you'd hear someone's TV, a toilet flush, or at least pipes knocking. That night, it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. I locked my door out of habit, pulled the curtains, and turned on the TV. One of those generic New Year's broadcasts was on. Hosts smiling too hard, crowds somewhere far away screaming over loud music and fireworks. The sound felt wrong in my apartment, so after a while I muted it and let it play silently. That's when I heard a knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just a soft, measured knock on my front door. I checked the time, 10:17 p.m. I didn't move right away. I wasn't expecting anyone. No delivery, no neighbors I'd talked to. I just stood there, listening, trying to decide if it had really happened. Another knock. Same rhythm. 3 light taps. I walked up to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No movement, no shadow. The lights were on, but everything looked flat, lifeless, like a still image. I opened the door a crack, feeling ridiculous for being nervous. Nothing. No note, no package, no sound. I closed and locked it again, telling myself it was probably someone at the wrong door or kids messing around, even though I hadn't seen or heard any kids in the building for hours. I went back to the couch. At 10:34, the knock came again. Same pattern. This time, I didn't even get up. I just listened, counting the seconds between taps. After a few seconds, I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow ones. Moving away from my door. I waited longer than I needed to before checking again. The hallway was empty. Around 11 now, I poured another drink and turned the volume back on slightly. The hosts were talking about resolutions now, filling time until the countdown. I glanced at my phone. No messages, no missed calls, No group chats lighting up like usual. At 11:41, the knock returned. This time it was closer. Not louder. Closer. As if whoever was knocking was standing too near the door, leaning toward it. I felt my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. I stood there, frozen, staring at the door handle. And then I heard breathing. Right outside my door. Not heavy, not panicked. Calm. Patient. Like someone who had all the time in the world. I didn't look through the peephole this time. I didn't speak. I didn't move. After a minute that felt much longer, the breathing stopped. The footsteps retreated. I stayed by the door until midnight, not sitting, not blinking, just listening. On the TV, the crowd began counting down. 10, 9, 8. I didn't join in. 7, 6, 5. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There was another voice. Faint. Offbeat. Coming from the hallway. Counting with the TV. 4, 3. The hallway voice was closer now. 2. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. 1. The building went silent. No cheers, no fireworks, no celebration. Just quiet. I stood there shaking until the TV hosts started yelling again, laughing, clapping, pretending nothing was wrong. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I opened my door. There were footprints in the thin layer of snow that had blown in overnight through the hallway window. They stopped directly in front of my door, facing inward. I moved out 2 weeks later. I still don't watch countdowns anymore. Because that night I wasn't alone when the year changed. Someone else was counting with me.
There's something unsettling about moments everyone shares at the exact same time. Midnight. Silence. A collective pause. Because sometimes when the world stops, you're not as alone as you think. If this story felt too real, you're not alone. And if you've ever experienced something you can't fully explain, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. More stories like this are waiting here, and some of them don't feel like fiction at all. It felt too real. Some stories don't feel like fiction,